I'm Randall Schaefer with the Hastings Cable Access Channel, and I'm here at the Pierce Cedar Creek Institute with Ellen Holstate, who is Community Program Manager for the Institute. And today you're going to give us a tour, I believe?
I am.
Tell us what the tour is about, please.
So we're going to be looking for fall fungi. We're going to see what pops up out of the ground for our mushrooms that only appear in the fall. So these are the ones that really like that cool, wet weather. What we see what's out here for our fall mushrooms. So this is a really fun specimen. This is a fun mushroom to find in the fall. You know it is the particular type of mushroom, and I'll tell you what it is in just a minute, because it's got a yellowish cap. It's got these warts or white spots on the cap, and it's what they call a bulbous bottom. Now you may have seen a red version of this in the past. The red version is what you think of for Super Mario Brothers or in Minecraft. It's got that red top, it's got that white spots. That is an amanita mushroom. So an amanita mushroom is one of your deadly mushrooms. These are one of those mushrooms you don't want to eat, but they're really cool to find. So characteristics for them. This one is a yellow version of it, not the red, and it has gills underneath its cap. So what I mean by gills, look at all of these right here. This is where the spores or the fruiting part of the mushroom comes from. When we think of a mushroom, usually we think of something that's got a stem, has a cap, and usually has gills. That's our typical toadstool that we think of. But when we see this mushroom, this is only part of the fungus. So what is a fungus? A fungus is basically this whole plant kingdom all to itself. I should not have said plant, its own kingdom to itself. It's not a plant, it's not an animal, it's its own scientific category. And the fungus, a lot of times what you see when you see a mushroom is basically what you consider its fruit. So think of a fruit on a tree, so like an apple. That is what helps that apple tree reproduce. It's got the seeds, it's got everything it needs to make a new tree. Same with a mushroom. When you see a mushroom pop up, that's the fruit of the fungus, and most of the fungus is below ground. It's lots of different, basically root-like structures below ground. When it's producing a mushroom like this, that mushroom is trying to produce more mushrooms. So it has spores that comes out of those gills, and those spores are going to be making new mushrooms. This one is one of our deadly mushrooms here in Michigan. This is one that you can touch. I always say you can touch whatever mushroom you want in Michigan. There's only one species that I know worldwide that if you touch it, you'll have a problem. It's a poison fire coral mushroom. It doesn't live in Michigan. It lives in Asia or Australia. So even if something is deadly to eat or poisonous to eat, you can still touch it. Just do what your mom said. Wash your hands before you eat. Don't lick those fingers. Always wash your hands. And so I can touch this, wash my hands, and not have a problem after. But this is our amanita mushroom. So I'm going to put this one away. And let's see what else we find. And there's actually quite a few down here. So one thing to be aware of when you're on the hunt for mushrooms is that you want to be aware of your surroundings. You may find a good mushroom, but make sure when you're reaching for that good mushroom, you're not reaching for poison ivy at the same time. So remember, leaves of three, let it be. It's that same concept when you are mushroom hunting. Be always aware of your surroundings. There's a good example over here. So in this area, there is poison ivy, so you just need to be careful. But we also have a lot of mushrooms. So this is all the same species of mushroom. it may look a little bit different because some of these have algae growing on them. So when they're greenish like this, it's actually an algae growing on top of another mushroom. This is the typical color for this mushroom. So if I pull one of these off, give me a second. So it's very moist today. We've had a lot of rain. So this mushroom is called a turkey tail mushroom. Trametes versicolor is the scientific name. So turkey tail because it kind of reminds people of a turkey tail. So it's got what they call concentric circles coming around. It can come in different colors, so it can be browns, it can be darker blacks, it can be kind of grays. Sometimes it might have like a little purplish tinge to it. But if you want to know it's a true turkey tail, you have to flip it over. Any mushroom you have, always flip that mushroom over and see what it looks on the underside. So our amanita had gills on the other side. Our turkey tail actually has little pores. So think of like pores on your face. This has pores underneath, and those pores are where the spores are coming from. You know you have a true turkey tail mushroom when you see those pores. It has to have pores and it has to have a white underside. If you do not have pores and a white underside for your turkey tail, you may have a false turkey tail. So there are false turkey tails. It's a totally different genus and species. It looks very similar on the top, but underneath it is more of a tan color and it does not have pores. It is a smooth surface. So that's when you know you have a false turkey tail. Now, turkey tail is one of those species that is like the top 3 species that you're going to find for mushrooms. This is one you find all over. They tend to be on these decaying logs. You might find them actually on trees, but they tend to be more on something. And they're in that category of shelf or bracket fungi. So they kind of look like a shelf or maybe a bracket on a wall. They do not have that typical stem that you think of and that typical cap that you think of for a mushroom or a toadstool. They don't have a stem really at all. They attach their cap directly to whatever surface they are on. Turkey tail is really special because it's in another category called white rot mushrooms. So what white rot mushrooms do is they actually break down a lot of the materials in a lot of wood. So what makes a tree a tree? Well, what makes a tree is that cellulose and that lignin in the tree. That lignin is what helps that tree grow big and strong. It's what makes that bark. It makes that wood. Turkey tails are one of the few, and white rot fungi in general, are one of the few types of things that can actually break down lignin. There's not many things in the world that can actually break down that lignin. Turkey tail, as well as other white rot fungi, such as oyster mushrooms, can actually break down things other than just wood. They can break down oil and oil spills. They can break down, there's been studies where they have broken down cigarette butts. And you can find cigarette butts all over this world. There's been studies where they've been able to break down dirty baby diapers. We definitely want them in this world. Turkey tail is a good example of how fungi are nature's decomposers. We don't see a lot of logs or a lot of wood all throughout our forests because we have these fungi that help break them down. So we really want these fungi around. Now, turkey tail, a question I get a lot of times are these fungi edible? Now, there's lots of rules for edibility, and we'll get to those. But turkey tail is one of those that it's in that category of 25% that, yeah, they're edible, but they're not really tasty. They're mainly known as a medicinal mushroom. So this is a mushroom, there's been lots of studies where the studies that they have found where they've made teas or had extracts of turkey tail mushrooms, and they've actually been able to use them on cancer patients and other medicinal properties. So this is more known as a medicinal fungus, whereas others are known for their edibility or for being poisonous. All right, so this is another one of those top 3 fungi that you're going to be finding all over. It's another type of bracket fungus, just like our turkey tail. But if you look at the top, it's kind of fuzzy. But if you look underneath, it looks very different than that turkey tail. This is actually violet-toothed polypore. So we've seen a gilled mushroom, we've seen a mushroom that has pores underneath. This actually has little spines, or what they call teeth underneath. And from those teeth, that's where those spores come out. Now remember, a mushroom is basically the way that fungi reproduce. They basically shoot out their spores. Those spores are coming out of here. The best way to identify this one is that violet or that purple color and those teeth. So again, you really want to look on the underside when you're looking at any mushroom. They tend to be found a lot of times on sticks or logs. You may even see them more closely attached, so kind of like this. So they're sometimes also known as a crust fungus because they are more closely attached to the log. They sometimes don't look like much. You may just see a little bit of the white on a log or a little bit of that purple there. Sometimes they'll also form that bracket or that shelf, just like a turkey tail will, but sometimes they'll just be mainly hugging the stem. But this is another one that you're going to see many different places. Remember, teeth and purple. So usually you think of fall and you think of all those beautiful fall colors, the reds, the yellows, the oranges. But I think of fungi when I think of fall, and especially this bright orange fungus. So this is a fungus that's called jack-o'-lantern, is its common name. It's called jack-o'-lantern because it's nice, bright orange, just like a pumpkin. It also might be called jack-o'-lantern because it also is one of our few species that glow in the dark or are bioluminescent. So worldwide we have probably about 1.2 to 1.3 million species of fungi throughout the whole world. Of that 1.2 to 1.3 million species that scientists have estimated, about 75 species, only 75, have been identified as bioluminescent. So again, glowing in the dark. Our jack-o'-lantern species is one of those. So maybe they called it jack-o'-lantern because of the orange color, or maybe they called it jack-o'-lantern because it glows like a jack-o'-lantern does. So how do you identify your jack-o'-lantern mushrooms? Well, as I said, it's got that orange cap. Underneath it has gills. Remember, always look underneath, very important. And the gills are something called decurrent gills. So they come down a little bit onto the stem. They don't stop as soon as they hit that stem. Another word for the stem might be stipe, or sometimes people might use stalk as well. But they come a little bit onto the stem. As I said, they have gills. They also grow in big clusters. So that clustering is a good indication you might have a jack-o'-lantern mushroom. Now, there are lookalikes to our jack-o'-lantern. Our jack-o'-lantern mushroom is a poisonous mushroom. So you do want to be careful on this one that you don't confuse it with some edible varieties. One variety that sometimes people will confuse our jack-o'-lantern with that also is this nice orangish color are our chanterelle mushrooms. So chanterelle mushrooms actually also have gills, and they have gills that come onto the stem, but their gills come farther down on the stem. And their gills are actually called more ridges or false gills. So what do we mean by ridges or false gills? Well, what we mean is a ridge, you can actually pull those gills off and they come fairly cleanly off of that cap. If I was to pull on this, they'd basically rip up that cap. The other difference on their gills is that they have more forked gills. So what I mean by forked is like fork at the end, the gills don't stay straight, they will fork off, and they'll have cross veins. So that means they'll have little veins of kind of gill-like material in between those gills. Going back to the bioluminescent part of this, why do they bioluminesce? So why do we have some species that bioluminesce? Well, our jack-o'-lantern species, the caps actually bioluminesce. That's the part that glows in the dark. Other species, actually it's just their root-like structure, so their hyphae, that's maybe going into wood, that's the part that will glow in the dark. So if you've ever seen a glowing log at night, it's not the log that's glowing, it's actually a fungus that's glowing. So there's one called firefox. If you've ever heard that term before, the firefox is what's glowing, and that's a fungus. So plants don't glow. There's no plant that naturally glows in the dark. It's probably a fungus. You may have heard of some plants glowing in the dark, but really that's scientists putting in genes from other things that have bioluminescence. So there are scientists that have, in the last few decades, put in genes from jellyfish to make plants glow, put in genes from fungi to make plants glow. So it's kind of like this whole Avatar, if you've ever watched that movie, getting our plants to glow. So who wouldn't want a plant as a nightlight? That's the only way our plants will glow. Back to bioluminescence, why they might glow? Well, there's two theories. One theory is that it's kind of a warning to anything that wants to eat it. So our jack-o'-lantern that glows actually is poisonous. So it's a warning maybe saying, hey, I'm glowing to let you know, don't eat me, I'm not good. However, there's another type of mushroom that is actually the largest mushroom in the entire world. It's the humongous fungus. Now, Michigan used to have the largest organism in the whole world, which was a type of honey mushroom. And that mushroom, unfortunately, Oregon has beat us out. They have the largest organism in the world. It's another type of honey. But that one is actually an edible mushroom. Those honey mushrooms do also glow in the dark. So the fact that we have an edible mushroom that glows in the dark and a poisonous mushroom that glows in the dark basically means that theory probably isn't true. However, scientists have another theory, and that other theory deals again with its spores. So remember, spores are coming down from those gills, but sometimes spores don't disperse via wind. Sometimes they have other things that helps them disperse their spores. So scientists think they are glowing to have insects come over to the mushroom, pick up those spores, and then go to another glowing mushroom. There are nocturnal insects, so this may be the case, but we're still researching and trying to figure out if this is really why some fungi glow. So this is what a typical jack-o'-lantern growth form would look like. It tends to be clustered like this, and you can see the caps are nice and big and open. But when they are younger, you can see they're much, much smaller in the cap. You can see a lot more of that stem. That stem looks to be a lot thicker in comparison to the cap. Now, when they glow, that's what they glow like. So it has that almost greenish yellowish glow, what you think of for bioluminescence. Now, the cool thing about this bioluminescence is that it uses the same chemical reactions that fireflies use. So it has that same chemicals that fireflies would have, and that's what's making those caps glow. Now remember, I did say that sometimes the jack-o'-lanterns, so I'll go back to this picture, sometimes the jack-o'-lanterns can get confused with chanterelles. Those are the chanterelles, so they're more vase-like, and you can definitely see that the gills come farther down on the stem, and they're more singularly growing. So they will grow in clusters, but they don't all come from the same point.
Okay.
All right, so another really common fall mushroom that you will see that is what we consider a choice edible is dryad saddle, or another name for it is pheasant back. So it's right here on the tree. It tends to have more of a scaled appearance. They call it pheasant back because it reminds some people of a pheasant's back. Or it's called dryad saddle, which is another common name because it looks like a saddle that a dryad might sit on. So this is a mushroom that's another type of shelf mushroom. It does have a little bit of a stem to it, just a little bit, but it comes off and makes more of a shelf. Now, these are older specimens. These are older mushrooms, and I know they're older because they have that blackish spot right in the middle of the cap. On fresh specimens, on more your choice specimens, you don't have that fresh part, or you don't have that black part to the cap. Now, this is one of our mushrooms that will actually show up both in the spring as a fresh mushroom as well as in the fall. And one other identifying characteristic, so one of the scientific names for this is polyporous, so that's the genus of it. It has another genus. Scientists are always reclassifying all their fungi, but so this one's really close to the ground. I see poison ivy right here. I don't really want to crawl on the ground. So I'm going to take my smartphone or any camera that I might have. I can also take a hand mirror, and I'm going to flip my camera so I can take a picture of the underside and see what that looks like. All right, so I took a picture, and then I can look, and this is a very blurry picture, but I can see if it's got pores, if it has gills, or if it has teeth. This one should have pores. That's a very defining characteristic of it, because remember, the genus Polyporus. And so if you're identifying your dryad saddle or your pheasantback, you want to have pores. It's going to have those scales, kind of brownish scales on a white surface. It's going to have a shelf, and you may see it in the spring or the fall as the fresh specimens. Now, these guys will stick around for a while. So they're not just going to pop up and then disappear in a few days. They will stick around for months. That's how we see these older specimens. I've seen them get about the size that a small child can sit on, basically. So there's another name for that saddle. But they will stick around for a while. If you do choose to eat them, you want to have them fresh. No dark spot in the middle. Now, speaking of edibility, I said I'd talk about my rules for edibility. Anytime you want to eat a mushroom that is new to you, especially if it's a wild mushroom, first, make sure you know exactly what you are picking. You want to be 100% sure you know what it is. If you're not 100% sure, it's not worth it. You can only eat a bad mushroom once, so don't do it. Second, only try a little bit at a time. Try a little bit, keep some for later. Wait 24 hours to 48 hours to see if you have a reaction. Just because something is said to be edible doesn't mean you can eat it. You may have a different reaction that someone else might have. So, for example, people have nut allergies. Other people don't have nut allergies. It's the same idea with wild mushrooms. Third, make sure you only eat one wild mushroom at a time. Don't mix mushrooms in the same pot. That way you know what you're having a reaction to if you do have a reaction. One other rule that I always have when you're trying wild mushrooms. Now, this is the party pooper one, I do have to admit, and this is only for adults over 21. Do not try it with alcohol. So if you are trying a new wild mushroom, I know it seems like that's a horrible thing to say. Some people love their wine or love their alcoholic beverage with wild mushrooms to eat, but that will affect your tolerance to a mushroom. You want to see how you react to a particular mushroom before you add in any other factors. And so don't try it with alcohol the first time you are trying it. And I forgot to say one more. Anytime you try a wild mushroom, cook it thoroughly. So you can get white button mushrooms from the grocery store. We know those are safe to eat. We know we can eat them without necessarily cooking them. But wild mushrooms, you want to cook thoroughly. You want to make sure that you've cooked them before you eat them. So otherwise, as long as you have all those down, go and try things. All right, so this is your shaggy mane or inky cap or lawyer's wig. There are so many common names for this mushroom. You only find this one in the fall. And what it is, it's more of a bell-shaped or what they call a conical shaped. It has lots of little brown scales and it tends to be white. Now, there's a reason why it's called inky cap, and you can kind of see it if I put my fingers. It has that inkiness that comes off. So we've talked about spores getting dispersed many different ways, from gills, from pores, from even teeth. Well, how inky cap or shaggy mane disperses its spores is that it's what I call this big self-destructing fungus. It will become an inky, gooey mess, literally a mess. The entire cap will turn into basically inky globs, and that's how it'll disperse the spores. It'll all the way up to the top, that's what it'll be. So how do you tell what it is? So it's actually got a hollow stem for this mushroom. And as I said, it does turn into an inky gooey mess. You may see these in your lawns, and you may see them in what you call a fairy ring, so more like a circle. So lots of these in a circle. And what's going on is a lot of that fungus, a lot of this is below ground. So remember, a fungus, what you're seeing when you see the mushroom, that's just the fruit. So that's just the part that's trying to make more mushrooms. So a lot of the fungus part is actually below ground, in its hyphae, in its mycelium. Those terms basically mean its root-like structures. It only pops up a mushroom when the temperature, when the weather is just perfect. So when you see one make a circle, it just means it is growing out of that circle. So think of it like a tree. A tree, the middle of the tree, the trunk, that's its major part, and then the branches come out. It's the same with the mushrooms. The branches of that mushroom are coming out and making, that fungus is coming out and making mushrooms around the outside. The other thing about this one, shaggy mane, there are some lookalikes. One lookalike is actually in the same genus and looks very similar to this one. It'll give you gastrointestinal problems, so if you do eat it, this is a wild edible, but the lookalike that will give you gastrointestinal problems is only found in the spring, whereas this one's only found in the fall. So you can have to know when you are actually looking for these mushrooms as well. But this is a fun one to find. When you do find it, if you want to collect it, you want to find them when they're young and white. When it gets to this stage, I think of it like the fluff on a dandelion. You can eat dandelions. You can eat the dandelion heads when they're nice and yellow. I know some people like to put it in pancake batter and fry them up. But once they get to what some people call the wish flower or the fluff of the dandelion, you don't want to eat it. It's not very appetizing. Same with this guy. You don't want to eat it at this stage. Not very appetizing. Which brings me to another thing. If you are mushroom foraging or hunting for mushrooms and do plan on collecting mushrooms, you want to bring along maybe a basket or maybe a paper bag. You don't want to use plastic bags. And this one is a good example of that. If you were to put this fresh in a plastic bag, there's not much breathability to that plastic bag. It's going to start self-destructing, turning into that inky gooey mess a lot quicker than if you were to put it into a paper bag or a basket. So if you do go out wild foraging or just looking for mushrooms for fun and you do plan on collecting them, you do want to bring a basket or a paper bag and not a plastic bag. And a whole log. Here we go. So these you may have seen in your yard before. These are puffballs. So puffballs are kind of fun. They look like big balls. Sometimes they can be very, very white and about the size of a small child. I've seen puffballs in people's yards before that I have to do a double take. Is that a soccer ball, a volleyball, or is that a puffball? So that's how big they can get. So if you're looking for puffballs, they actually have their spores on the inside. So what you want to do is you actually want to open it up, and let's see if I can get this open. Whoop. And this one's a nice fresh one. You want to open it up and it should be white on the inside when it's what they call immature or choice, to be honest, to eat. So it should be white and firm on the inside. Once it gets to the point where it gets to more the spore stage or an older stage, it'll turn more yellowish, it'll turn brownish, and then it'll eject its spores in a big poof. Hence the name puffballs. Now, there are many different species of puffballs that we have here in Michigan. Some have more of what they have, like a little pedestal underneath or pear-shaped. There's the giant puffballs that you might find in your yard. Puffballs will actually also make a fairy ring, just like our inky caps or our shaggy mane will make a fairy ring. But they are, I kind of like to equate them to tofu. So when they're young, when they're white, if you slice them up, they will take on the taste of a lot of other things. So puffballs are a really fun one to find, but again, you want firm and you want white on the inside. If you do not find white on the inside when they are young, it might be a poisonous earth ball or false puffball. Those you don't want to eat. So you really want to make sure you have a puffball. But they're, to be honest, one of my favorites. I actually like stomping on them to help them disperse their spores. But definitely they're a fun one to come across, and they can come in many different shapes and a few different colors, but more brownish and whitish. Look at that guy. This is a wax cap. So in particular, a golden wax cap. It almost has that ombre look on the top where it's got almost a darkish orange and it goes into yellow. It's a little different than golden wax cap. Golden wax cap, excuse me, not golden, but yellow wax cap has more of a yellowish top. There's also a scarlet wax cap. Now, if you're anything like my husband, you only believe in Roy G. Biv when it comes to colors, but mycologists, people who study mushrooms and give these things common names or scientific names, don't believe in just the normal rainbow colors, so we go into the scarlet and the golden colors. This is one that actually does have gills on the underside of it, if you can kind of see the gills. It also has almost a sticky, wet type cap. So the genus name is Hygrocybe, which basically means wet head for our wax caps. And it basically means that the head of them, or the cap of them, always is kind of a little moist or wet. But these guys come in a lot of different colors, as I said. More of the orangish, yellow, reds. It makes me think of different fall colors, not just our leaves, but also our mushrooms. And it's kind of fun to see, but sometimes you don't even notice that they're there. So a lot of times people get what's a fungus confused with a lichen as well as moss. A lot of those people confuse because they seem to grow similarly. A lot of times all on trees, right? A lot of times right next to each other. So here we've got a greenish moss. So a moss is actually a simple plant. So it's a plant because it can photosynthesize and it can make its own food. That's how we know it's a plant. Right next to that moss, we actually have a type of lichen. Now, lichen is actually a beneficial relationship between a fungus and either a cyanobacteria or an algae. So wait a minute, what's going on in this relationship? Why do they have this relationship? Well, what's happening is that the fungus is providing the structural support for the cyanobacteria or the algae. And the algae and cyanobacteria are basically providing the food to the fungus. Now, fungi are actually more closely related to animals and humans than they are related to plants. Even though they have a stem like a plant, they kind of have a fruit-like structure like a plant, they have spores kind of like the seeds, they actually cannot make their own food. So a fungus actually has to get food from its environment just like we do. And so that's why they're more closely related to animals than plants. And so in this lichen relationship, lichen in a way is kind of like a fungus because it does have fungi in there. Now you can also get fungi. Now what are fungi? When you think of a fungi, you're thinking something that can't make its own food, so it can't photosynthesize. It doesn't have what they call true roots. So by true roots, I mean it has hyphae, so basically little straw-like structures, kind of white threads that go into the environment. It may put out enzymes into the environment, just like we have enzymes in our stomachs that break down things. They'll break down things into the environment, but it's not technically a root. It's actually made up of a chitin, the same material as an exoskeleton of an insect. And the last thing it has are spores. It doesn't have seeds. Spores are very different than seeds. Seeds usually have their little own lunch pail with them when they go out into the world. They actually have a little bit of food that comes with them so they can grow and reproduce. Spores are very different than seeds. So you need those three things in order to have a fungus. They're not a lichen because it's a relationship between a fungus and something else. And it's not a moss, otherwise known as a bryophyte. This is basically chicken of the woods. Latiporus is the genus of it. So porous means it has pores on the underside. This is a very spongy fungus. So if you were to feel this, you'd feel a lot of give to it. Kind of think of your kitchen sponge, right? It's a very spongy fungus. It has more of a shelf. So another common name for chicken of the woods, at least one of the species, is sulfur shelf. Say that 5 times fast. Sulfur shelf. Because it looks like shelves on a tree. So lots of little shelves. But it's very spongy. It's actually a very good wild edible. I like it actually better than morels. Now, you didn't hear that because most people think morels is the best thing ever. But it's a very tasty one. However, if you're not used to wild foods, this is one that you might have some gastrointestinal problems. So this is one that you need to try just a little bit of and see how it reacts to you. So chicken of the woods is one that's only a fall mushroom. You only find it in the fall, and you tend to find it more on oaks. That's not to say you can't find it on other hardwood species, but oaks are the best species to look for if you're looking for chicken of the woods. This is not to be confused with another bird name that you tend to find in the fall, which is hen of the woods. Now, chicken of the woods, Latiporus, there's 2 different species, but they both are found in that shelf-like structure. Hen of the woods, not this color. Chicken of the woods is kind of like a candy corn color. So it's got the reds, it's got the oranges, it's got the yellows, just like candy corn that you find in the fall. Hen of the woods tends to grow more at the base of the tree, tends to have more of a rosette. It has more grays, more browns, more whites, but it is porous on the other side. So if you look at the underside, it is white and has pores again. But again, it tends to be more at the base of a tree. You can find it a little bit farther up, so it's not always at the base, but it does form those rosettes, and they're both good wild edibles in the fall. So this is chicken of the woods, and this is one of the two species of chicken of the woods. It has a yellow pore surface, so if you look underneath where the pores are, it is yellowish. This is one that you usually find more halfway up a tree because it will decompose what you call heart rot. So it basically is a saprophytic fungi, which basically means it breaks down the inner parts of the tree, that heart of the tree, which is why it's called heart rot. The other type of chicken of the woods is also another latiporous species. It's found at the base of the tree. It tends to have a white porous surface, and it breaks down basically what you call butt rot, so the roots of the tree. So they're found at different parts, but they sometimes are found on the same tree. So again, this is chicken of the woods. Now, not to be confused with hen of the woods. That way? Not to be confused with hen of the woods. Hen of the woods, very different color, doesn't have that candy corn color. It's more those browns, those blacks, those grays, and those whites. But it does have a white pore surface underneath. It does grow more in a rosette. As I said, it is found more at the base of the tree, but it can be found a little bit up. But it has a very different flavor than chicken of the woods. And it's another interesting fall mushroom. There's actually some professors at Michigan State University that are working on how to cultivate morels in more of a farming situation because they are so ephemeral. They really are a spring mushroom. Sometimes you have to really wild and forage them, and if you don't know where you're going and where to look, they're hard to come by, and so that's why sometimes they're so expensive. And as I said, we're still learning kind of how to cultivate them. Ravenel stinkhorn is what this one is. Stinkhorns tend to pop up in a lot of places, but definitely in mulch like this. There's two main types of stinkhorns that we find here in Michigan. This one, which is Ravenel stinkhorn, and dog stinkhorn. Features you're looking for a stinkhorn, they tend to have a stem like this and then almost like a flattened cap on top. Ravenel's almost has a little like almost hole or kind of eye-like structure at the top. The very top is sticky. So we've talked about different ways that fungi disperse their spores. This is another way. It's very sticky right here. There's where their spores are. And it's called a stinkhorn for a reason. It stinks. It has a very distinctive smell. And why it has that smell is that it's trying to attract things such as flies. With that smell, those flies will go to this very sticky, gooey area, get those spores on them, and then fly to another one that has another smell. So stinkhorns are fun. You tend to find them in mulch areas. The dog stinkhorn, this part is reddish, and then the top part is more of that olive green again, and they tend to be a lot thinner than this one. But you're going to see them pop up definitely when it's wet in mulch. They only last really for a few days. Some people have asked me, well, what do I do to get rid of them? Just wait a few days. That's the best way. If you just throw more mulch on them, you're just basically feeding the mushroom. You're not doing anything other than that. If you really want to get rid of it, you basically need to dig up all that mulch, get rid of that mulch, and put new mulch in. So really, I'd say wait a few days. They'll go away. They're not going to harm anything. So with the stinkhorns, one thing to think about, these are slightly older. So you see they're starting to kind of go over a little bit. They're made out of a lot of water, so if it's a really dry spell, they're really going to go away fast. But they actually form as a little egg underneath the ground. So some mushrooms, you may notice that they seem to just pop up and are huge right away, and that's because they are forming underground on almost like a little egg-like structure, and they have almost a little veil around them. And when they pop out of the ground, that veil basically goes away. The bride has been born in a way, and you see these mushrooms pop up really quickly. Now, something to be careful about with stinkhorn. When they are in that egg-like structure that is more underground, but you might see it a little bit more above ground, it can look a lot like a puffball. So you actually want to cut it in half, and you want to see what it looks like inside. If it is white and firm like that puffball we saw earlier, you're good to go. But if it has any shape that might look like something with a stem, with a cap, amanitas do the same thing. So amanita mushrooms, you don't want to eat those. So you need to just be careful, but they're a fun mushroom to find. You can see right here, they're even hollow inside. This is one you probably have seen in maybe a playground or any other place that has lots of mulch, but you probably didn't even realize it was there. This is actually called bird's nest fungi because literally they look like a little nest with little birds' eggs inside. And there's many different genera that have these in them, but basically the characteristic is it starts off like this, where it has almost a layer over that top, like a little veil, like we talked about previously. That veil will come away, and then it'll open up. It'll have a little nest structure. And each one of these eggs is its own little packet of spores. So lots of spores within each one of those egg-like structures. Now, bird's nest fungi actually disperse its spores very differently from others. It has that cup-like nest shape because it's relying on the rain to disperse its spores. So a raindrop will come along, it'll drop into one of these little nests, and it'll splash out those spore packets. And those spore packets then will go to a different area in other parts of the mulch and make more bird's nest fungi. So a lot of these are actually quite older. You can see the darker color, but they're really fresh when they have kind of a whitish inside. You may find those spore packets to be white. You may find them to be more dark, like these, more blackish color. But all of them are just a type of bird's nest fungi. It's not what you typically think of a mushroom or a fungus. It looks more like something that came from a bird, right? But it's another form of a fungus. There's so much diversity when it comes to fungi. We have more to discover every single day. So I'm going to end with something called advice from a mushroom. And you may have heard of advice from a tree. You may have heard advice from a river. But this is advice from a mushroom. So when you're thinking about mushrooms, maybe take this advice. Be down to earth. Sprout new ideas. Keep a low profile. Know when to show up. Stay well-rounded. Start from the ground up. And be a fun guy or a fun gal.